That was quite a kind of a weird story, obviously, like methamphetamine during the so-called Third Reich. So I just went online and I Googled a little bit, and there was like hardly anything to be found, but there were some traces. And there was one academic paper by a professor from a southern German university who had researched a little bit this methamphetamine topic, and his conclusion was without methamphetamine there would have been no Blitzkrieg, which is quite a statement, you know.
But let's talk a little bit about our most obvious area of overlap, because that's probably the biggest common denominator in our audiences or whatever, which is sort of drugs, consciousness, and so on. You had a sort of breakthrough book with Blitzed. Before that, you'd been doing more like novels, fiction. How did you get into writing Blitzed, and what's it about for people who don't know?
I was just clueless what my next novel could be. I had written 3 novels, and I asked a friend of mine, a DJ from Berlin, DJ Alex Kramer, who's DJ at Club of Visionaries in Berlin, underground kind of electronic music club, and he said I should write about Nazis and drugs. And I replied, there's nothing to write about because I didn't use any drugs, because I was educated like everyone else in West Germany about the Nazi regime pretty extensively, but drugs never played a role. Like, historians had never written anything about that, and also in our school books there was no mention of Nazis taking drugs. I mean, what you would read from time to time is that they were like that Hitler was like a teetotaler, like Hitler would never, not even drink coffee, not smoke. Like uh, there's this propaganda episode where he like throws away his pack of cigarettes into the Danube River, and since then, from that moment on, he's like toxin free, and he becomes this pure vessel for the German nation. So this is like an important part of Nazi propaganda, and somehow it was, believed also in post-war West Germany that that the Nazis were these like, they did horrible things, but they were law and order. They were for discipline. So like secondary things that that could be attributed to them were still known, or like the propaganda somehow survived. So I said to Alex, well, but the Nazis didn't take drugs. And he said, well, they did, because a friend of mine who was an antique dealer just bought, and this was in 2010, an old medicine cabinet in an East Berlin apartment. Like, well, not bought, he just, when he emptied an apartment for old furniture, he found this thing, and there were tablets from the 40s in that cabinet labeled Pavitine. And my friend Alex, who was a DJ and drug connoisseur, he read on the package that it said contains methamphetamine. So he became interested, because he's not only a he's more actually a drug person than a psychedelics person. So he's really into kind of habit forming substances, and it's also amphetamines. He likes amphetamines, and he took these old 60-year-old pills.
What? Wow.
And he said that they still worked very well, and that the first one kind of gave him a buzz, and then he was curious. He took a second one after like 30 minutes, and he felt high, and then he took a third one because he's an excessive guy. And he pointed. We were standing at the river in my writing space in Berlin, as above the river, and he pointed at a big ship that was coming by, and he says it was like the engine of a big ship were turned on, and I felt this kind of, he said the German word Schub, which means like, push of a large push of an engine.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite a kind of a weird story, obviously, like methamphetamine during the so-called Third Reich. So I just went online and I Googled a little bit, and there was like hardly anything to be found, but there were some traces. And especially there was one academic paper by a professor from a southern German university who had researched a little bit this methamphetamine topic, and his conclusion was without methamphetamine there would have been no Blitzkrieg, which is quite a statement, because no one's ever made that statement or ever talked about that. So I traveled down to southern Germany I kind of took my Alex's advice to now write about Nazis and drugs because I realized there's something there. And I met this guy, and he said, "Yeah, there's actually a lot more. I just didn't have the time or the interest to go through the military archive, which is in Freiburg town in Germany." So I went there, and he gave me the signature, so I could look very like I knew where to look. And there was actually a treasure trove of information how the German army was using methamphetamine in a systematic way. And I realized that no one's ever really written about this of except this one guy, and he only wrote like 2 pages. There was like a lot more. So this then formed a formidable novel where I'm telling an invented tale with true facts in it, obviously. But then my publisher said these facts are actually what's fascinating me. I don't care about the invented characters that you care so much, but I really care about the facts. So he suggested to me to write a nonfiction book, which then became the book Blitz. So I kind of threw away a novel that I had been working on for 2 years, still sitting in my desktop. Who knows if it's good or bad? But he said the good thing would be to write a nonfiction book that actually shows the facts. So this is what Blitzed is, and he was right. The publisher was right for once. Sometimes it's good to not self-publish, but to actually have a publisher. I mean, we might talk about self-publishing too, which I think is a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was a conventional publisher that said, do a nonfiction book. And the readers that, I think thank him for it, because in the nonfiction book, it has an apparatus, it has a sources. It's different to read the truth, or at least, what could be the truth. I mean, it's as close to the truth as you can get, I would say. Much closer than in a novel, obviously. And in this case, I think it was the right choice.
I mean, the along with speed, I think the Nazis also developed methadone, right? When they were looking for ways to control kind of their people and so on.
I think you mentioned this in 2020. I don't know if you remember that when we were on a podium together in Graz in Austria.
Oh, right on. Yeah. Is
That's
that?
when we met, actually. And
Yeah.
you mentioned that methadone, and I had to admit that I had not done proper methadone research. I mean, I know that they did invent it, because the problem was that the opium fields at one point during the war were blocked for Germans. Like, they couldn't access the raw material anymore to make uh, proper opiates. So I guess methadone, does it have opium in it, or is it's purely synthetical, right?
Believe it's synthetic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
synthetic. So that's why they developed methadone, because they wanted to have a painkiller you know that is independent of the natural source of the poppy flower. I guess
Mhm.
that was how it came about to develop methadone.
What was your favorite discovery or new idea when you wrote Blitzed?
I was I went back to that military historian, and I said I research now a lot about methamphetamine in the army, and I think it's fascinating, but I would like to also expand my research to Hitler himself, because I had also seen online that he had this crazy doctor which gave him drugs. And Ian Kershaw, the number one Hitler biographer, wrote in his 1,000-page biography on Hitler like one sentence or like 5 sentences about this doctor, Theo Morell, that he gave Hitler a staggering amount of drugs, but he never goes into the subject matter, because I think Ian Kershaw, just like all the other historians, is not a drug expert, unlike us. So I was curious, what drugs did he give Hitler? Does that play any role? And also the guy who wrote about methamphetamine, he said, this is not important. This is just, yellow press kind of writing. Why would you be interested in Hitler's drug intake? But when I went to the Federal Archive and actually found the original um, documents by this doctor, by Theo Morell, like his original book where he wrote like every day when he met Hitler, he wrote in his handwriting what happened that
Oh,
day.
I've seen that book.
Yeah. Where did you see that?
Wait, does he talk about psychoanalyzing Hitler?
No, he only talks about giving drugs to Hitler. He's not into psychoanalysis, because that's a Jewish practice. At least that's what the Nazis said, because it was developed by
Yeah.
Freud. I don't think Hitler would have allowed anyone to psychoanalyze. Where do you get that from?
I'm gonna have to remember where I found this weird old book in a library in somebody's bookshelf, and I was blown away because it was talking about Hitler and drugs and Hitler and psychoanalysis.
Well, the Allies somehow tried to analyze him from the distance. So there was a psychoanalyst, I think, working for the British Army, kind of trying to do an analysis of the character of Hitler, because I think Britain tried to get ideas on how the war could, evolve if they would know enough about Hitler's personality. So that could be interesting, but that was a different book. The book that I found was
Yeah,
actually the medicine book by Theo
yeah.
Morell, where it just wrote like October 10th, 1942, the war is going bad, where Hitler is like, not Hitler, he called him Patient A.
Hmm.
Patient A is nervous and in a very bad mood, bordering on depressed. He discusses with me what to give him that day. We decide on giving him that opioid and that vitamin together in a super injection and stuff like that. And when I read that, I thought this is great.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a story that was suddenly, captivating me as I was sitting in the archives, kind of actually being a fly on the wall in rooms where no one was present. But Morel actually was present because he was giving the drugs and he was writing it down. But no one had looked at these notes really. That was quite surprising. I could see in the archive the history of the usage of that material, and had been checked out by like 3 people since the end of World War II, even though Morel was like with
Wow.
Hitler every day. So historians had completely overlooked this very rich source material. So when I saw it, I thought this is great. So this was like this was my moment, like sitting there
Mhm.
in the archive thinking this is cool. And I'd never
And
been
then
to
you
the
found,
archive really before. This was like
sure,
the
sure,
first
sure.
time.
And then you found out that Hitler's use of this stuff became more and more heavy as time went on, and as he approached the ending.
Yeah, which makes sense. But it's
Yeah.
actually true. And I presented this to Hans Mommsen, the late Hans Mommsen, like leading historian, German historian on National Socialism. And he kind of looked at the material and he said, this finally explains um, Hitler's shift. Like he was not shift. He was very effective in taking decisions up to a certain point, personal decisions and also military decisions. And then there's a moment when he kind of becomes a bad, or I mean bad in relation to Hitler is a weird word, like an
Yeah.
ineffective military leader. He makes like wrong decisions, and that's the moment when his drug intake increases. So you can see a correlation. And it's not that his decisions on the one hand became worse because of the drugs, because the drugs he took created like a tunnel vision and removed. You can see that the drug intake of opioids and cocaine comes at a point when his decisions are not as good anymore. So I think they do create a tunnel vision, and they remove him from remove him from reality, so he's less able to make decisions that are affecting reality in the way that he would like reality to develop. Because that's war is very real reality. You have to make precise decisions, and if you don't accept what's going on the ground anymore, if you're like living in a fantasy world, it becomes very difficult actually to make these decisions. And on the other hand, because the war was going worse and worse for Germany, he took more and more drugs, because that charisma that he once had, that like being so sure that he's right, that history is going his way, that conviction became shattered, because his generals came back and they said, well, actually, you're not right. It's going really bad on the battlefield. So he would take more to convince himself and then to convince others that he's still on the right path. So it was a downward spiral. And I think you can only explain this if you understand his drug intake, the opioids he used, oxycodone he used, cocaine. and no one had explained this before. So in a way, Blitz has become the most accurate Hitler biography, which is weird. I suddenly became a Hitler expert without ever wanting to become
Hmm.
really a Hitler expert. So it was like kind of in a Don DeLillo novel. I'm suddenly number one Hitler expert without wanting to do that. Like at one time, I got a call like from a live Colombian radio station, an interview, and they asked me. I was like in Berlin, like opening the door of my car, letting my kids get into the car, and this radio woman asked, like totally excited, "So please tell us, did Hitler survive the war? Did he live in Argentina or did he not? We really want to know it now from you because." And I said, "No, he died in the bunker." I mean, I had no idea if he really did die in the bunker. It just seems like he died in the bunker. And then she said, "Okay, then we can rest assured that he's actually dead."
Yeah.
So it's a bit absurd, but it's also, it's interesting. Yeah,
I mean, I
I
guess
I like to take on the role, but it's I also have a life outside of that, obviously.
sure. I mean, discussing the topic of this book for a lot of Americans, and I saw a comment on this in the chat. It's going to trigger questions around what's happening now with this sort of like authoritarian movement, and if it's being fueled by the same drugs or other drugs. I mean, we know, for instance, that Elon Musk has been like deep into the ketamine hole and so on. There's rumors that Trump is takes a lot of Adderall. Um, there's like close-ups of like white bits of powder shooting out of his nose and so on. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess larger question around how drugs kind of mediate social consciousness. Like we probably never would have had the French Revolution and started the modern world if it wasn't for coffee, right? So like suddenly there were all these like cafes in France, and everybody started drinking coffee and then talking to each other about what was happening. And then they realized that it was terrible, and so they had a revolution. So yeah, there's always that question of how drugs mediate social reality, or accelerate, or amplify certain aspects. I mean, and certainly in America, we're awash with all sorts of psychoactive drugs right now.
I mean, that's really, I think, your expertise also, and I would be curious to hear what you think about the current role of drugs, especially psychedelics in the US. Are they changing the society for the better? Would it be great if RFK would legalize psychedelics, or would that possibly lead into, you know, even deeper into an authoritarian state? What do you think?
Yeah, my perspective has toggled. When I wrote Breaking Open the Head, my first book, I was much more optimistic about the value of a lot of psychedelics flooding into society, and I've lost that naive optimism that they're definitely going to produce positive effects on a societal level. Um, and yeah, the studies, I think there's been some studies. I mean, do psychedelics actually make people more empathic, more aware? Maybe they do in some ways, but I think it's a more complicated situation than we thought at first. And they're we know there people call them non-specific psychic amplifiers.
Right.
So they amplify whatever you have already kind of like going on.
I spoke about this with Israeli neuroscientist Leo Roseman. He works in London, and he actually said that psychedelics don't bring about peace, but they could energize a peace movement. But I guess they could also energize like a right wing movement, because psychedelics can also make you believe even more in your belief system. So they are really. I mean, I always thought that. I mean, that Timothy Leary just thought we all need to take drop acid. We all become like good people, and I thought that also for a long time, but it doesn't seem to be the case at all. Even though I do think there's a tendency um, to become a quote unquote better person when you take psychedelics, because it does connect areas of your brain that are usually not connected in such a way. So it does, create creative thought processes. So
Yeah.
overall, I would say it is a positive force. And I think if we're looking at a different future model for our society, like an egalitarian planetary society, if you would agree, I don't know if you would agree that that could be a utopian society, then it would be clear that psychedelics would have to be legalized.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think it's turned out to be much more complex, and yeah, definitely. I think I mean, when people first do like something like ayahuasca or mushrooms, they often feel much more connected to nature, and they become aware that their subjectivity is often like programmed or conditioned by ideologies and social force. And there are reasons, there's all the reasons why the mainstream establishment, kind of cut them off in the 60s. They were kind of scared of people abandoning the corporate culture and going back to the land and starting communities and joining, social justice movements and so on. And then it's been, so that was like that door was closed tight, in the early 70s when they made all these substances, Schedule 1 and so on. And now the door is kind of opening sort of slowly, but it sort of feels more and more, I mean, as America moves more and more towards a right-wing thing, that a lot of kind of right-wing people are moving into the psychedelic world and sort of trying to sort of capture the energy of psychedelics, either for some kind of Catholicism or kind of it's all about innovation or entrepreneurship for corporations, microdosing, or it's really just about the individual having these like healing realizations that allow them to be super effective, in business or in corporate or something, rather than, which is what I wrote about and what my hope had been when I wrote my first books, was that the insight from psychedelics would lead people to kind of analyze the structural basis of the society and the systems of exploitation and domination, and would tend to lead people into more of a alternative modes of response and resistance. And that has
And
happened with some people. What's that?
maybe it depends how much people take. If you take very high dosages, which come with ego dissolution, maybe also your
Yeah. Well, I also like Jamie Wheel in that talk. I think we were at that talk together, Denver. I can't remember. Did you come to in the Denver Psychedelic Science Conference? My friend Jamie Wheel gave a talk, and I wrote about it. He talked about the sort of 80-20 rule, that actually like 80% of the benefit one gets from psychedelics is from like the first handful of big experiences. And then after
right.
that, going back to it, because those experiences are so amazing and ecstatic, but it's never quite, like those first experiences where you got like a new imprinting and a repatterning and floods of insight and so on. So we talked about Blitzed a little bit, and you had a more recent book came out called Tripped. Do you want to tell us what that was about?
Well, Tripped is a book about the early history of LSD, and with early history, I really mean like the first days and months and years within the company Sandoz in Basel, Switzerland. Um, the question behind this book is a question that my father asked me, and the question came after we discussed in our family whether we should use LSD in microdoses against the Alzheimer's disease of my mom. I
Hmm.
had read a report by an American startup company called Eleusis that LSD might help in low dosages, microdosages. That was the first phase clinical test that had been done. And my father my father had been a judge, quite a high judge in Germany. So he said, well, if this is beneficial, why is it then illegal? It doesn't make sense to me. There must be something wrong with
Mm-hmm.
what you're telling me, or like it's something I don't understand. So I said, okay, I'm going to research why LSD actually did not become medicine. Was it really for health reasons, or was it for different reasons? So I became interested in why the company was not able to put it on the market, because when they developed it in 43, they did the first tests within Sandoz. They created an intoxication room within the company, and company employees could use the compound. And they didn't know anything about LSD. No one knew anything about it at the time, so they would just taking this novelty compound in different dosages, and everyone absolutely loved it. And there were some depressed people working for Sandoz at the time, or bored people or melancholy people, and they all like suddenly had a new interest in life, and they were happy. And this was at a time when World War II was really destroying, so many lives and so many, you know, hopes, everything. It was a hugely traumatizing event for Europe and the world. So, and Sandoz actually thought that, if our people in peaceful Switzerland already react so positively to LSD, what maybe this could really help a lot of people. This could really become like a big seller for the company.
Mm.
Makes a lot of sense to think that way. So what went wrong, basically? This is the
Mm.
question that my father then wanted the answer for. And what went wrong? It took me quite a while. I went to the archives of Sandoz, which are in Basel, which are now in with the company Novartis, who bought Sandoz in the 90s. They have a company archive, and anyone can use it. But in contrast to a public archive, you don't get a find book, so you don't get an objective overview of what's in the archive. So you cannot really demand, I want to see this or I want to see that. You kind of have to you have to sweet talk the archivist who is employed by this company,
Mm.
Novartis. He's a Novartis employee, and his job is not really to reveal the dark secrets of the company. His
Mhm.
job is to kind of whitewash the company's history, and by pretending they have this archive that anyone can use to find all the facts about medicine development at Novartis and Sandoz. So it was a bit tricky to actually figure out what went wrong. But there was a point when I was able to bribe the archivist, and I bribed him with actual LSD that I happened to have with me. So we were like talking, and I said, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to find, and I wanted to read the papers of the CEO, not the papers of Albert Hoffmann, the chemist who actually discovered LSD. I mean, I had read them before, and they're interesting,
Yeah.
and but they have been written about before. We all know, or at least there's the story about the bicycle ride and how he self-administered LSD and what happened to him. But this is not the answer to the question that my father asked. So I wanted to see the papers of the CEO. Arthur Stoll is his name, and the archivist was quite reluctant to show me these papers. But then I suddenly said, "You, I have something. I have something for you. Actually, I brought some LSD. Do you want to see it?" He's like, never seen LSD, which he actually had never seen. And I said, this was a product of your company. And he was kind of flattered, kind of interested. So he took it. And then he said, okay, what do you want to see now? And he became more open. Like LSD actually opened the doors for me in the archive. And I said, I want to see the papers of Arthur Stoll, the CEO. And he said, okay, I'll look what I can find. And he went inside, and came back with the archival stuff. And I already knew then this was going to be a book. Just the scene alone was like really was funny. I
Yeah.
like to write about it, and then I looked at through the papers, and I found the smoking gun. Then I really knew that this was a book, or this was the answer to my father's question, because I could clearly see that Arthur Stoll, Sandoz's CEO, had been best friends with a guy called Richard Kuhn. Richard Kuhn is a Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, and he had been a Nazi, basically. He had a German a biochemist who had stayed in Germany when the Nazis took over, and arranged, himself with the regime, would open his lectures with Heil Hitler and stuff like
Mm.
that, got funding from the state. And he was best friends with the Swiss CEO since the 20s. So because they had the same mentor, which was a Jewish German chemist, Richard Wildstetter. They had both studied under Wildstetter. Wildstetter had kind of developed biochemistry, which means we take potent alkaloids from plants and create medicines from that, which is different than synthetic chemistry, which is, ketamine is a synthetic stuff, but he was biochemistry, taking potent plant alkaloids. So this was what they both worked on. Kuhn for the Nazis, Stoll for Sandoz, and they
Mm.
always exchanged their research. Since the 20s, they had both done ergot research, which is the
Hmm.
plant that the
Yeah.
fungi, not a plant but a mushroom, a fungi that LSD comes from.
Right.
In every LSD trip is ergot, natural compound. LSD is not synthetic; it's a half synthetic drug because ergot is always in it. So they had exchanged always this knowledge. I read about that, and I that was fascinating. Then I would like switch, like the letters became more and more interesting as the dates on top of the letters became closed in on 1933, and then 1940, 1943 they would still exchange everything, and then Stoll wrote to Kuhn, "Look, we found this incredibly potent ergot based compound. We call it LSD 25. We don't really know what it is, but it works so powerfully on the mind." And Kuhn at the time was working on a so-called truth drug for the Nazis. So he was researching what compounds could be used in interrogations to bring out the truth from people who don't want to talk. Even under torture, they don't want to talk. So maybe we give them a drug and then they will talk. So he thought maybe it's LSD. And Kuhn was taking part in organizing SS tests in the concentration camp of Dachau. First, these tests were done with mescaline. They were done on inmates. So SS guy, his name was Plötner, would give an inmate a cup of coffee with some mescaline in it, and then ask appropriate questions once the mescaline kicks in order to see if he can extract secrets. But mescaline tastes bitter. um, it's more expensive. It's not so easy to make synthetic mescaline, and for half synthetic or from cacti, it's also hard. Where do you get the
Yeah.
cacti from in Germany?
Mhm.
So LSD was a much better choice for them. So they did tests. The SS doesn't write LSD in the reports. They just write like an odorless, tasteless substance. And then when the US military liberates Dachau in April 1945, they find these reports. And at the time, the US military immediately becomes interested in doing truth drug research themselves because they find themselves now in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, where it's all about, extracting secrets from the outside. Who's on our side? Who's a sleeper? This was like the paranoid vibe of the Cold War from the start. So a truth drug is of vital importance, at least if you're, have the mindset of an intelligence officer. So first, U.S. military gets interested by these Nazi experiments, and then CIA, founded in 1947, gets interested, and then program MKUltra is being developed because of that, or at least putting a strong emphasis on LSD research, which basically continues from Nazi Germany in the United States on unwitting Americans. And this is kind of the story of Tripped, and this is also the story, the answer to my father's question when I go back to him and say, "Look, LSD is not illegal because it's dangerous for your health." It might be, obviously, if you take it in the wrong setting and too much, whatever, but it's illegal for different reasons, for ideological reasons. And that's actually when we decided in the family to trust that white paper that I had read and to give LSD in microdoses to my mother, and with great benefits, cognitive enhancements of my mother. It didn't stop or reverse her Alzheimer's disease, but it did slow it down. At least that's what my father thought after a while. So that's why I wanted to call the book actually LSD for Mom, which I think is a
Hmm.
much better title than Tripped, but the publisher wouldn't agree to that. But that's
Yeah.
the book in a nutshell.
Yeah. The first book might have been called Patient A is Very Nervous.
Well, we thought about calling it Hi Hitler.
Hi. Oh, hi,
Hi
Hitler.
Hitler, yeah. But my German publisher thought that was too funny for
I'm glad you liked the Nerd Reich, by the way. It's a good little pun.
the Nerd Reich is a great. That would be a great book title, but it's already taken. I heard
Yeah.
someone's writing a Substack.
Yeah. Okay, so you wrote all this stuff about drugs, and then I mean you're in Berlin. Were you always exploring like psychedelics and that kind of stuff yourself, or was that more recent that you got interested?
No, I when I lived in New York in the early '90s and I wrote my first novel, I had a girlfriend named Anna, and one day she said, "Why don't we try LSD together?" And I basically never even smoked pot. So I had no idea. I was like a total newbie to drugs, and she gave me the strongest LSD trip I've ever had. And I walked on a Saturday night in the Lower East Side, and it was just the most intense experience on LSD I've ever had. And since then, not a really good trip, actually. I mean, a very good trip, but a horror trip. But Albert Hoffman said the horror trips are the best because they teach you the most. I just thought I would go crazy because I had no idea what this stuff was. I was completely uneducated, which is the state of our society. We are uneducated about drugs. I mean, now you and me and a lot of other people are writing about it, which I think is important because the government is actually not informing us properly about drugs. To the contrary, it's ridiculous. The government should have a certain role and a certain responsibility, which they completely lack to exercise. So what was your question? What I lost the thread.
Just ask you about your own psychedelic use.
Oh yeah, so since then I have been actually interested in psychedelics because that was so fascinating. This LSD trip, what happened in my mind. So I did,
Yeah.
after my first shock receded, I tried it again, and I've had LSD, I don't know, maybe 100 times or 200 times, which is probably quite a lot for the average person, but it's not that much. In the last like 30 years. I do think, for me personally, it's good, and I can evaluate the risks, and I kind of like to integrate that into my life. But I never thought about writing about it until I then read that paper and discussed it in my family, and suddenly I was on this real like journey. What actually is LSD, and why did it become illegal? Why was it thrown under the bus by like government authority?
Yeah.
So, but I've always been fascinated by also the Nazis and drugs. I could not really have written that book without certain drug experiences, also with like negative experiences of like addictive drugs like amphetamine.
Yeah.
I'm really not a fan of amphetamine, but I also tried amphetamine, and I think it was important for me to try it in order to write about it. Um, but I did not take all the drugs that Hitler took. I think that would have been a friend of mine who designed the cover for Blitzed, the German cover, Douglas Gordon, a Scottish artist. He said we should do an art experiment and put someone in a gallery in Berlin and give him exactly the same drugs quantities that Hitler took, but that really would be we. It would be hard to find someone who would do that.
Oh no, it wouldn't. I know some very hardcore drug takers. That reminds me of this thing somebody did on Instagram. He takes the diet of different political figures, then lives like they live for a week, and he lived on Donald Trump's diet for a week,
That would be
and he
hard.
almost knew it. It nearly killed him. It was like gallons of Diet Coke every day, Doritos, Big Macs, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and maybe one
But
little fried steak
how
country
do we
club.
know? How do we know actually what he eats every
I
day?
guess the guy does the research. You read the biographies. His schedule is pretty available. But yeah, the guy could almost not do it for more than a week. It was too brutal.
Are we
But I like that.
allowed to look at the files? What drugs Trump takes in like 20, 30 years? How is the law here in the US? Do you know?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. No.
Would also be interesting to see what, like, for example, JFK took. He took a lot of drugs. I mean, every
Yeah.
president probably takes a lot of drugs. And it's an
Well,
interesting field.
the theory about Trump right now is that he's suffering a level of cognitive deterioration. His father sort of disintegrated cognitively at around his age, and he might have a little bit of like frontal lobe dementia. And when you combine that with the narcissism, it can lead to somebody really like sort of their instincts and their impulses kind of being completely yeah. There's no blockage anymore, no obstruction. So, and it seems like the way he speaks, he's acting is very much like that right now.
Another Don DeLillo novel of a president becoming
Yeah.
like get dementia and suddenly like making random decisions, and there would be a point when the system would have to try to remove him, but that also would be like a very problematic procedure. So
I mean,
this seems
this,
to be
yeah,
what we're moving towards.
yeah. I mean, I'd say it's more lunatic than any like Don DeLillo or J.G. Ballard kind of a novel because they also have a lot of people around him are Christian fanatics, and they actually have a ideology where they see him as part of the prophecy, like he's the sort of the king who comes before the revelation and the messianic return and so on. So that's like, even Peter Thiel is talking a lot about the Antichrist right now.
Trump is just the beginning.
What's that?
Trump is just the beginning of something that will come afterwards.
It feels like it gearing up for. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's touch and go right now in America, Norman. We just don't know where we're headed at the moment. But yeah, I
So
was also.
what
What's
can
that?
we do? What can we do to stop it?
I mean, it's that's a huge long discussion. I mean, it's something I've been trying to think about and writing a lot about. I mean, there are movements that people can join, like the Sunrise Movement and Indivisible, that are pretty intelligent in how they're organizing protests. I mean, I feel there needs to be a lot more speaking out and a lot more discussion, like a lot more face-to-face community meetings. Yeah, so I'm looking for ways to plug in, but I'm not a very good joiner. But I'm trying to figure out what to join right now. I know there's also mutual aid network starting in New York. Tompkins Square Park, where I live, right around here, has a mutual aid network. So I've been on their mailing list and hope to join that at some point. But yeah, it's a wild, it's like a whole new ball game right now here. Um, but yeah, it's like actually I went to a talk last night. I don't think I told you about it, but it was from a genetics guy about polygenic embryo kind of choosing. Basically, now it's not exactly like genetic engineering, but you can have a bunch of fertilized embryos and you can test their genes, and you can be like, oh, like this one is not going to develop that disease, and this one will be more intelligent, and this one will have blue eyes and be 6 foot tall or whatever. So they're offering this as a service to people for $50,000, where you can like choose the better embryo. And it felt like, because you were mentioning Don DeLillo, I felt like I was in the prequel of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, like that. We can see that we're just at this incredible pace, kind of moving into these various dystopian sci-fi realities in a way.
I have nothing to add.
Well, let's talk a little bit before we close off for today about your recent Iboga experience. I don't know if you know, that was a major catalyst for my own journey of like discovery. I
I read the first pages of your book
Yeah, yeah.
where you.
So I was in my late 20s. I was very depressed, maybe early 30s, can't remember. And I got an assignment from a hip hop magazine to go to Gabon in West Africa. And it was really before, this was maybe like 1999 or something. So it was really before this whole new wave of psychedelic movement had started. And there was a South African botanist who was working with this indigenous group. And it felt very edgy. The shaman was like yelling at us, demanding more money from us during the ceremony and stuff. But the experience of Iboga was really tremendous, and I was, I'm really happy that I did it, in this sort of proper context, wearing like the initiation outfit, and they had us lying on the cold ground. They didn't want us to have like a blanket or a pillow or anything. You're really supposed to just be in this very hard situation for a while. But and I, it was a transformative experience for me. That I did it again many years later down in Mexico in Rosarito Beach. How was it for you?
I thought it was amazing. I did it in a clinic called Ambio in Mexico, and it was very luxurious compared to what you experienced in Gabon, which is in a way bad because it's a bit more, it's totally westernized in a way. But then again, just, not comparing it, just looking at it at its what it was very good because it was a very high dosage of Ibogaine, which is the magic, or the number one alkaloid, I would say, or probably the most potent alkaloid within Iboga. So I received a very high dosage of Ibogaine, and when it started to work on me after about 2 hours after I swallowed these 4 capsules, I just laid down and I closed my eyes and I could see how my brain goes into repair mode and how the Ibogaine flows into my brain and around the brain and finds all the spots that need, adjustment or reconnection. And from the first moment on, I had the feeling that this medicine is friendly and is helping me and is really healing me, quote unquote, healing me. And this is exactly what happened. I was lying there for 10 hours, kind of experiencing how this magic compound that comes from the root bark of an African plant, probably one of the oldest plants on the planet, because it does grow in a region that has not been touched by the ice age. So the iboga plant is actually growing in Western and Central Africa for about 500 to 100 million years. So it's really a very old plant that has tremendous power. And I was happy of all this power being unleashed in my brain. I just felt that it's doing me good. And also it was funny, I could ask Ibogaine any question I wanted, and the Ibogaine would just know. So I'm still unsure whether, because it's impossible that the Ibogaine knows. How would the Ibogaine know about my life? I mean, maybe it's possible, but it's
I had
hard.
that experience my second trip also. What was the most extraordinary Q&A that you had? Was that?
Well, and then I thought maybe it just unlocks my own capabilities of answering these questions. Maybe our consciousness is so much more intelligent than what we are in our day-to-day operations. So that's I don't know what you think is the answer. Is it Ibogaine that knows, or is it us that knows? But for sure, Ibogaine makes it possible that we know more during the Ibogaine. So I wanted to know why I'm so tense. It's kind of a mundane question, but it really is of importance to me because on a cellular or physical level, I always tense up, and I do this as long as I can remember. So there must be reasons for it, that you tense up in situations where there's no need to be tense, and it's much better to be relaxed because it saves you energy to be relaxed. It's life prolonging, it's very beneficial. And it actually went back into, the pregnancy of my mother, and I could see exactly the situation. I don't want to go into the detail now because it's very personal, but it was very interesting, at least, what happened between my parents when my mother was pregnant, how their relationship changed, how that changed their relationship, or how that formed their relationship to me as an infant, as a small child. And I mean, it's like classical kind of psychoanalysis, but to understand this in a talking therapy, I don't think you could ever get there. So Ibogaine kind of brought me there. I thought that was amazing.
I had the
And
same type of experience. Yeah, the same type of experience. Yeah.
but then I could also ask it very contemporary questions like, what should my next book be? And
Hmm.
Ibogaine just told me, it just told me what my next book project is. And I don't want to talk about it now. I don't want to spill the beans, but
Yeah.
because I'm still working on it. But it was very cool, for a writer to be able to ask, what's your next book, and then get the answer. And it's actually an answer. Like, there's some drug trips where you have like extreme revelations during the trip. You
Yeah.
might not even remember it when the trip's over, or you do remember it and you think, yeah, well, that was actually, it felt extremely profound during the trip, but afterwards it's just, okay, whatever. But with Ibogaine, it's different. It really sticks, and it really has a profound truth. So I do believe that, at least for me, Ibogaine is the best medicine that I have so far encountered. And I'm actually gonna do it again.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it again. I mean, it's not a drug that you take like every week, but maybe a few times in your life. I think it could be quite beneficial.
Well, now that you told me that you got a book idea from it, I'm thinking maybe I should take it again.
Sure, yeah. I mean, everyone should take Ibogaine. I'm seriously,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm not promoting it, but I think it's a good thing. It's
Yeah.
an
Good. Well,
interesting, and where it
yeah.
comes from. This
Yeah.
story is so interesting. I mean, you wrote about in your book about where it comes from. It's fascinating.
Totally. Totally. I'm curious. I have a sense of you as more sort of like existentialists. Kind of maybe not such a spiritual person somehow, but maybe but now maybe you're changing or segueing a little bit into having more of a esoteric or mystical kind of like vibe. Is that true, or that's just my perception?
No, I mean, I started as an existentialist writer,
Yeah,
smoking cigarettes and reading Camus and Sartre when I was 20. But through actually the psychedelics, I became an esoterically influenced or interested person, which was quite intense in the beginning because it was so new to me. So I became really esoteric, and I was wearing Egyptian robes and meditating a lot and only doing yoga on LSD and stuff like that. So I kind of progressed, and I moved forward, but I still, I s- I am actually quite spiritual, to
nice.
be honest, because I think there's a bigger story out there. Now, this is the
Yeah,
spirituality that I believe in. I think the universe has a narrative that is a cosmic consciousness, or many cosmic consciousness, but certainly there's something out there. I believe in that, and we can sometimes grasp, understand the bigger narrative. And I think that spirituality to be that we understand, what it's all about. What is it trying to tell us? What is this unity that we're living in? At the same time being separated, not being fully conscious, even though we are inside of our conscious, we
yeah,
are actually fully conscious. So yeah, I'm very spiritual actually. That powers my writing, that informs my writing, and hopefully also my life. Educating my children. Being a good partner. I think that's all. Mm, that's what really counts in life, I think.
beautiful.
So I'm not just
Um,
so existential, but I also like the existential vibe.
oh, I mean, Camus was like fantastic,
Yeah,
and both those.
very good style.
Yeah, you might be interested in this Rudolf Steiner stuff I'm working on right now. We're actually doing it, but you're leaving New York. We're doing a thing in New York on
Yeah,
Saturday.
no, I want you to tell me a little bit about that Rudolf Steiner, because obviously he's known in Germany, but why are you interested in him and what are you exactly doing about him now?
Um, yeah, I'll answer that. Somebody asked, can you recommend places for Iboga? There's a number of places in Mexico and Costa Rica where I think it's quite legal. There's the one that you went to. What was the name of it? Ambio, you said?
Ambio, yeah, Ambio in Tijuana.
There's
Very
another
cool.
one in, I'm trying to remember, blanking on the name right now.
Beyond in Cancun.
Yes, exactly. Right.
That's
Uh,
the mission within in Tijuana. Mission within and Ambio in Tijuana, very good, especially if you live on the West Coast. You just have to go to San Diego, they pick you up,
yeah,
do the 5-day ritual with you, bring you back to San Diego. It's quite convenient. Or you go to Beyond in Cancun, which is, I
yeah.
haven't been there, but it's probably also not bad at all, you know.
They'd actually offered me a free, because I'm friends with Tanya for many years. Maybe I'll take her up on it. I was just not sure that I wanted to do it again. But actually, as you're talking about it, particularly it was going to give me a good book idea. I would definitely go for it right now.
Just
um,
fly there and it happens to you. You don't have to do much, you know. You just
yeah,
have to
yeah. Oh, I did it twice.
fly there. Yeah.
Yeah, actually 3 times. I did it twice when I was in Africa. But anyway, with Rudolf Steiner. So one of my ideas, I guess, is over the last 60 years, people in the West discovered this kind of spiritual hunger and this like emptiness and so on. And so we went on a search, starting maybe in the 50s, 60s, 50s with the Beats and the hippies, the 60s. And we discovered kind of Eastern metaphysics and yoga and Tibetan Buddhism. Then we discovered indigenous, South American shamanism and sort of indigenous cultures in North America and so on. And we sort of like, didn't really go into the kind of Western esoteric tradition as much. I mean, Crowley was a little bit popular, Gurdjieff, and so on. But of all the Western occult people of the modern era, Rudolf Steiner is, I think, the most important and kind of the most kind of a misunderstood or kind of like suppressed. He has a sort of fusty, sort of fuddy-duddy quality to him. But actually, when you get into the teachings, it's really, I mean, very, very powerful and very useful. And I guess one way I look at it is, I mean, I'm an idealist, or it's a philosophical perspective where you believe that consciousness is much more likely to be the foundation of the universe rather than anything material or physical. There's like a philosopher, Bernardo Kastrup, who's a analytic idealist, and Steiner was also a monistic idealist. And his first book, actually, Philosophy of Freedom, was a refutation of Kantian dualism. He's just a very fascinating character. He was having like natural clairvoyance when he was a kid. He realized that nobody else had this kind of ability, so he didn't talk about it until he was like 40 and had gotten a doctorate of philosophy and was kind of credentialed, and he was studying Goethe's like science papers, which also had a lot of significance for him. And then he ultimately became the head of theosophy in Germany. Then he left theosophy and started anthroposophy. He realized that the sort of the sort of pre-ground for the Nazis was this kind of occult movement, Thule, and he realized there was a sort of dark occult thing that was gathering, and he wanted to create like a white occult movement or positive. Anyway, so yeah, I just think he is just a very profound thinker and very nourishing. And actually, I mean, I think also sometimes you can see the value of Steiner. And by the way, if people are interested in this course, it runs. We just did the first one on Saturday, and I'll go for the rest of the month. And they can learn more about it at my website, liminal.news. But yeah, I mean, somehow you can see that he had value and that he created these things, these institutions that have become very enduring, like the Waldorf schools or the Camp Hill villages for treating people with, disabilities, or biodynamic farming. And essentially, he would give all these incredibly complex esoteric lectures. Then eventually, like a group of educators would come up to him. They'd be like, "How do we apply your ideas to education?" Then he'd be like, "Oh, like you can do this and this and this." They would create the Waldorf school system. Or farmers would come up to him and they'd go, "Well, how do we apply these ideas to farming?" And then they developed biodynamic farming, which was based on like ancient folk ideas and so on. And then you get into the whole esoteric side of him. And so, for instance, he claimed that the mission of his life on Earth, as far as he understood it, was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the modern West. And that we lost that when we shifted from paganism and back into the monotheism and so on. And that not only did human beings reincarnate again and again, then he actually wrote these books where he would take different individuals, like it could be like Friedrich Engels or Goethe or Mozart, and he would kind of track them back to their past lives based on what he experienced in his visionary states. But also the Earth itself was reincarnating, and humanity was like differently constituted in every new incarnation of the Earth. Anyway, it's a mind-blowing, complex esoteric cosmology. And I think what's difficult is to find the right relationship, which is what we're trying to do in this course, which is like not be too literal, not sort of collapse it into sort of a literal thing, but find the right sort of like the right approach, which allows you to really get the benefits from it. And I see, one thing that interests me is like, I don't know if you know Rupert Sheldrake and the whole idea of like morphogenetic fields and so on. So there's kind of like, we're Westerners. We come from this European culture, which had like alchemy and Gnosticism and the Hermetic tradition and so on. So that's like strongly in our morphogenetic field as people from this type of traditional background, more so than, Eastern mysticism or South American shamanism. So it's, not to say those things aren't amazing and we can't explore them, but I think we also really need to reclaim our own esoteric lineage. And that really goes from like, back to the Gnostics, like Basil Valentinius, to Middle Ages people like Agrippa and Jacob Boehm and Swedenborg and, Paracelsus and so on. And then Steiner really being like the modern kind of like culmination in a way, maybe Jung to a certain extent also. So yeah, I just think he really, if we're going to escape, because now we kind of have like a situation where on the one hand there's kind of where scientific materialism and atheism is still sort of the dominant trend in the force in like the academies and so on. Somebody like Bernardo Kastrup would say that scientific materialism has actually now been kind of refuted in a way, and that it's an obsolete ideology, and that actually analytic idealism is a much more coherent philosophy and makes a lot more sense with everything we've discovered from quantum physics and so on. And yeah, I kind of think that's true. And then, so on top of that kind of analytic idealism, then we can weave, other ideas that make sense. And, there's approaches to things like reincarnation, which actually make a lot of sense, and there's even evidence for them in different domains and so on. So yeah, so that's my spiel on that. He's
All
also
right.
just by reading one of his books. Super interesting. Yeah.
So, having said so much, you and me today,
Yeah.
I think I will
We,
now go to Central Park and relax in the sun,
I
as
think I
long as
might
it's
go
cl-
at least to Tompkins Square Park, if not all the way to Central. Where are you staying? Which neighborhood?
in the Lower East Side.
Oh, cool.
But
Perfect.
I have friends. They just messaged me that they're in Central Park, so I might
All right.
head up.
Amazing. Cool, buddy. It was great to hang out. Good to get a chance to chat. And let's hang out again before you leave New York, if it works out.
Yes, and thank you for everyone listening in. I'm also happy that some new people from your community are in touch now with my community and otherwise, and let's each follow each other and continue the exchange because I think it's very vital and important in these dire times that we keep in touch. And you and me, maybe we'll have a coffee these days.
Sounds good, buddy. Have a great time at the park, and thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great afternoon.